The coronavirus has now spread to over 60 countries around the world, infecting more than 80,000 people with around 3,000 deaths. Italy has reported a 50% increase in confirmed cases. Egypt says 1,443 have tested positive for the virus. Australia and Thailand have reported their first deaths. To talk more about it is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining me from Washington. Lisa, the death toll in Iran has also jumped to 54, with close to 1,000 people in that country affected. A woman in her 60s from Iran is in self-isolation here in Canada, in Vancouver. The COVID-19 is not going away anytime soon.
No, it is not. And of course, this has everyone alarmed on all continents as we hear of more and more cases being reported. Uh, a similar case to you in Canada is an Iranian woman just became the first case in New York City. That has a lot of people panicking as well. Every morning at the foreign desk, we put out a top 10 email, and we have reported on the spread and the updates on coronavirus every single day since it has been detected. And of course, the stories keep adding on. Our list of countries keeps growing, and our list of cases keeps growing. Iran being one of the countries where we're not sure because of the underreporting and the lack of accurate reporting that comes out of the government there. So that number might actually be even higher and affecting more people who are getting on airplanes and very irresponsibly, either by the government themselves or unknowingly, because this is a dormant virus that lives within a human being for about 2 weeks before they see any symptoms that would alert one to be checked. So, of course, this is a cause for people to be alarmed. I flew actually to Washington, D.C. from Los Angeles 2 days ago, and of course, many people flying with masks on and many choosing not to fly. I'm currently in Washington for the APAC conference, as you know, Hal, and this conference draws in about 25,000 people every year, and this year it's significantly less. Because I feel a lot of people, including myself, had to review our decision to make the flight.
So how close are we to actually finding an antidote, a cure for so many cases here?
Yeah, interestingly enough, there is a lab in Israel that has been studying this virus even before it became the pandemic that is becoming. And they said that they may have the first uh, look at some sort of vaccine within weeks from now, but that vaccine will have to be tested and retested again. So, we're not actually, targeting this exact thing. And I think it's going to be a while before we see something that is, actually can be put into practice and put to work. So until then, unfortunately, Hal, these numbers are going to be rising.
The U.S. and the Taliban recently signed a landmark agreement to end America's longest war. Lisa, the Pentagon sees the Taliban deal as allowing for fuller focus on China.
It's really interesting. Already that deal has been broken. When I say broken, Hal, you and I, we always talk about these attacks within Afghanistan, of course, the Taliban taking responsibility. But what is the solution for the U.S. pulling out of Afghanistan and putting some group that has the know-how and the control and the ability and the power to take over in the absence of American presence? Well, many people believe that we don't negotiate with terrorists, and what deal is a deal with a terrorist anyway? And as we can see again, as I said, hours after the deal was put into place, we saw reports of Taliban attacks in Afghanistan. Other lawmakers here in the United States believe, well, we have to pull out, and the only answer is to deal with the only choice that we have, and that is to deal with the Taliban. So, unfortunately, this is the future of a country that has been war torn for decades upon decades, and this is no solution though for anything significant for them in the near future.
Now, still with the Taliban, Afghan's president has rejected Taliban demands for a prisoner release. Tell me more about that.
Right. So imagine not only has the Taliban not proven themselves in order to be a legitimate answer for Afghanistan's future, but imagine these terrorists filling the streets again. And again, not there has been no redemption. There has been no legitimate claim for the Taliban to deserve this type of to excuse them for all these years of terrorism. So yes, this is going to be a hard sell to agree upon releasing all of these terrorists.
China is seeking to control the UN agency that oversees intellectual property, and the United States is pushing back.
Yes, of course they're pushing back. This is one of the very sensitive parts of the deal between the US and China, and why President Trump has not been able to come to an agreement with the Chinese is over, among many other things, their reluctance to stop with the copycat stealing of intellectual property. And as we know, they steal drones, they steal electronics, they steal all sorts of intellectual property, and they replicate it for half the price or even less than that. This has been an ongoing trend for the Chinese. They've profited from it for many years, and now, of course, the U.S. wants to put a stop on it. From everything from, as I said, military technology to designer handbags, this has been a way of living for many Chinese exporters. So, the UN wanting to put the Chinese rather wanting to put their interests on the table at the UN, and of course the US wanting to put a stop to it.
The war in Syria is escalating as Turkey shot down 2 Syrian military aircraft. Lisa, reports say the target was the military airport, and Russia has a message for Turkey: we cannot guarantee the safety of your planes over Syria.
So many different layers in the war in Syria that has been going on for about a decade now. And of course, every group that gets involved has their own agenda. We've talked about how, Russia's in there and they want to boost the Bashar al-Assad regime. Iran is in there wanting to boost the Bashar al-Assad regime. Turkey is in there wanting to curb the influence and growth of the Kurdish population. And of course, when they're all in there in a small country like Syria, of course, they are fighting each other, and they're fighting each other for influence, for land, and to get the control back in their hands. So now Turkey, who had been more of a quiet partner for the Western allies, has become a more vocal partner because they want their agenda to go full force against the Kurds in Syria. But now they're getting pulled into the fray, as we knew would happen, and they're seeing more casualties as well.
And Turkish drones killed 19 Syrian government soldiers as tensions, they're continuing to rise.
Yes. So as I said, the Turks are upping the ante. They have to double down because if they're going to be involved, they want this to be as short and as sweet as possible. And as I said, this is not a situation that has been short or sweet by any means for anyone who's been getting involved on the ground in Syria.
More attacks on Israel, Lisa. The Jerusalem Post is reporting that a mortar was fired from Gaza towards Israel just hours before the polls opened for elections.
Yes, so election week, obviously a very sensitive time in Israel. Another election week, I should say. We've been through this many times. But it's business as usual for the Palestinians who have been launching missiles into Israel from Gaza for years upon years, but I should say more recently, more frequently, believing that the Israelis have their own issues to tend to. And if the Israelis are more occupied with their election and they're looking the other way, well, perhaps it's a good time to start lobbing missiles into that country. Again, this is a day in the life. Israeli children are often have to climb into these shelters. They often have to put on their gas masks. They are lobbing these missiles into civilian areas. And, how you always kid around about how since biblical times, this has been a way of life for Jews and Israelis living in that part of the world. And of course, it continues.
2 rockets fell earlier this week inside of a heavily fortified green zone in the Iraqi capital of Baghdad. This region houses government buildings and various foreign missions. Fortunately, there were no casualties, and a missile also apparently landed near the U.S. Embassy.
We wonder who that was, right? More turmoil in Iraq, of course, as things try to settle down there. Iraq is a very interesting situation because you had the protesters who came out and said enough with this. You have a government that said enough with this, but at the same time is embracing the Iranian insurgency there because they feel like they don't have a choice. It's almost like what we're looking at in Afghanistan, similar to what we're looking at in Lebanon with Hezbollah being intertwined with the government there. When you're looking at Iraq, they want to go forward. They want to build their nation, go forward, but they feel as though they have to include the Iranian insurgency so that they could live in peace rather than in war with this insurgency. At the same time, the Iranians are busy fighting the American forces that are still remaining there. Most have pulled out, but again, these assets, as we know from the killing of Qasem Soleimani, from the time that um, from that killing till now, the retaliatory attacks have been around American assets. So again, we look at the Iranian regime, we look at the culprit that could be, because they are still after getting that revenge and really avenging the murder of Qasem Soleimani, their commander.
Around 20,000 protesters marched through Moscow recently against the Russian government's proposed constitutional changes. Many view those changes as an attempt by Vladimir Putin to maintain his power beyond the end of his term in 2024.
Yes, so this major power grab by Putin, kind of went unnoticed. He thought nobody would know. Let me just casually extend my power and make my reign ironclad when I can. But now he's got problems back at home. When you have 20,000 Russians marching the streets, I think he's going to go hard on them, just like he goes hard on journalists who speak badly about him. But for Putin, what has been steady for him has been a constant support from home. His constituents enjoy good relations with the government because he is good to them. You hear this from minority groups living in Russia. You hear this from fringe groups living and human rights groups on the ground there as well, because Putin is more involved in his extra regional activities. At this point, when he has trouble back at home, this will reflect poorly on him, both at home and abroad. And I think he will have more to worry about this time around because he is spread so thin abroad. I think he'll want to put an end to this very quickly. He might go hard before, so it gets worse before it gets better, so he can quash this thing once and for all. But we'll see how adamant those protesters are about sending their message to the rest of the world.
Lisa, you're in Washington right now. Let's talk a bit about what's happening with the Democrats. Bloomberg, Sanders, I mean, the list goes on and on with a lot of the Democratic candidates. Who do you see as the biggest frontrunner and the biggest competition potentially for Donald Trump?
Well, it looks as though for the Democrats themselves, they're worried that Bernie Sanders will take the ticket, and for that reason, we've seen many drop out in the last couple days in order to make room for Joe Biden, who is obviously a much more center candidate and who the Democrats believe is more representative of their party, rather than Bernie Sanders, a self-proclaimed socialist Democrat. For Donald Trump, I think he has said at the CPAC conference last week that he hopes that it's Bernie Sanders who is running against him so that he could put an end and defeat socialism once and for all. It'll be difficult. I mean, in terms of the vote, of course, Joe Biden being a more centered candidate, that is very true and more representative of the Democrat Party. But people are worried that Bernie Sanders will go after, the millennial vote, feel the burn. Many people who are not aware of Bernie Sanders, the nuances of what he believes and what socialism actually is, what his policies really mean, the fact that he has, distanced himself from so many different groups in the United States, including refusing to go to APAC, the conference that I'm at right now, because he calls Israel's or this organization's, which is the biggest pro-Israel lobby in the United States, bigotry. I think he's done a lot of damage to the party, but many believe that he's electable because of the millennials, and a lot of people believe in his message.
How about the Trump impeachment trial, the whole process, Lisa? Some people say it really galvanized the right and it's going to make him even more appealing to be reelected later this year. Or some other people say, no, that's it, we're done, we're going to go with the Democrats. What are you hearing right now?
It depends who the candidate will be. I believe if you might get a lot of the independents going over to vote for a Democrat if that Democrat is palatable to them. I don't see independents going and voting for Bernie Sanders by any means. On the other hand, the economy, give or take a couple days here and there with the stock market adjusting to the coronavirus crisis, is doing great. The economy is doing great, and I think a lot of Americans that are middle of the road politically, financially, and otherwise, geographically as well, will vote with their pockets more than anything else. And when you come down to the economy, you can't argue jobs, you can't argue these numbers. With regards to foreign policy, national security, he's doing great. I actually think it's Trump's to lose. I think he's the only one who can defeat Trump right now. So if he remains steady and focused on his message, on the economy, on his strengths, then I think that he has a very good chance at re-election right now.
And the elections coming up in November should be interesting to see how it plays out. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me from Washington this time. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.